Welcome to Right versus Left News, your daily briefing on the stories that matter, told from both sides of the aisle. I'm your AI host, Chris, and each day I bring you the most important political and cultural news, with perspectives from conservative and progressive voices. No spin, no agenda, just the facts and the opinions that shape our national conversation. Let's dive in. Today we're covering 5 fast-moving stories. The Supreme Court says candidates can challenge how mail ballots are counted. The State Department pauses immigrant visas for nationals of 75 countries. The FBI searches a Washington Post reporter's home in a leak probe. Another Supreme Court ruling parries back double counting in federal gun cases. And Ukraine's finances take center stage as the IMF chief lands in Kyiv and the EU prepares a huge loan package. Let's dive in. Before we jump into today's stories, a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Family GPT, the AI chat platform actually designed for kids. If your children are curious about ChatGPT but you're worried about what they might see, Family GPT gives you full parental controls, content filtering, and the ability to align responses with your family's values. Whether Christian, Muslim, Jewish, secular, and many more. Monitor every conversation, set usage limits, and let your kids explore AI safely. No ads, no data selling, complete privacy. Sign up free at familygpt.chat.
Thanks to our sponsors for supporting Right versus Left News. Now let's get to the headlines. First up, the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that Representative Mike Bost of Illinois and other candidates have legal standing to challenge Illinois' rule that counts mail ballots postmarked by Election Day for up to 2 weeks after. The court didn't decide whether the rule is lawful, only that candidates can sue over it. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority, while Justices Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor dissented. The case now heads back to the lower courts and could trigger similar suits in states with late-arriving ballot rules. The decision came down Wednesday, January 14th, as reported by the Washington Post, the Associated Press, and SCOTUS blog. On the right, commentators frame it as a win for election integrity, a recognition that candidates are directly affected by counting rules. Outlets like The Federalist point to Roberts' view that candidates have a concrete interest in how votes are counted, arguing this lets courts address deviations before they cause chaos. Coverage on Fox notes that many states accept late ballots, and says candidates need a path to challenge those policies. On the left, progressive voices warn this could unleash a wave of pre-election lawsuits aimed at narrowing access to mail voting. The Washington Post and the Associated Press highlight the dissent's concern that the candidates didn't show a real injury, raising fears that loosening standing could destabilize election administration and prolong counts. Next, the State Department announced it will pause immigrant visa processing, the green card category, for citizens of 75 countries starting January 21st, citing public charge concerns. Temporary visitor visas aren't included, but consulates are instructed to refuse immigrant visas that haven't yet been issued. The administration says the pause will remain until screening and vetting are revised. Published country lists include Afghanistan, Iran, Nigeria, Russia, Brazil, Egypt, and more. It's the broadest legal immigration restriction of the term so far, according to Reuters, the Associated Press, and the State Department's notice. On the right, conservative media cast the move as enforcing long-standing law, so newcomers can support themselves and not burden taxpayers. Fox News describes it as a crackdown using the public charge standard, emphasizing English-language interviews, financial proof, and other screens, and notes it could continue indefinitely while the review proceeds. On the left, progressive outlets argue the policy will separate families and disproportionately affect black and brown migrants. Reporting in the Washington Post, the Associated Press, and PBS highlights critics who say it could effectively block hundreds of thousands of would-be legal immigrants each year and invite discrimination under the banner of cost control. Third, the FBI searched the Virginia home of Washington Post reporter Hannah Nathanson as part of a leak investigation tied to a Pentagon contractor accused of unlawfully retaining classified materials. Agents seized electronic devices, and the paper says the reporter is not a target. The Justice Department, under Attorney General Pam Bondi, has rolled back Biden-era guidelines that limited searches of journalists' records. Press freedom groups call this highly unusual and chilling. That's according to reporting from the Washington Post, the Associated Press, and PBS, Reuters, and Forbes. On the right, some argue leaks of classified information are a national security threat and say the Justice Department has a duty to investigate aggressively. Attorney General Bondi publicly defended the search, and right-leaning outlets note that focusing on the alleged source, while signaling the reporter isn't a criminal target, tracks with the law. On the left, progressive voices, including the Post's leadership and press freedom advocates, warn this escalates government intrusion into the press, risking source protection and investigative reporting. They argue the rollback of protections invites intimidation of journalists. We'll be right back with more of today's news after this brief message.
This episode is brought to you by Family GPT, the AI chat platform actually designed for kids. If your children are curious about ChatGPT, but you're worried about what they might see, Family GPT gives you full parental controls, content filtering, and the ability to align responses with your family's values. Whether Christian, Muslim, Jewish, secular, and many more. Monitor every conversation, set usage limits, and let your kids explore AI safely. No ads, no data selling, complete privacy. Sign up free at familygpt.chat.
Thanks again to our sponsors. Now back to the news. Fourth, in a separate Supreme Court decision, the justices ruled that prosecutors can't obtain two convictions for a single act that violates both Section 924C, using a firearm during a crime, and Section 924J, the death-resulting counterpart. The court said Congress didn't clearly authorize cumulative convictions for the same act, so one must go. It's technical, but consequential, for federal gun prosecutions and sentencing. The opinion is posted on Justia, with analysis from the Legal Information Institute and Federal Defender Resources. On the right, some conservative legal commentators see this as a straightforward reading of the statute that still permits severe penalties, just without stacking the same offense twice. Others worry it could slightly reduce leverage against violent offenders. Libertarian-leaning groups like Cato have long criticized overcharging and stacking, raising proportionality and separation of powers concerns. On the left, progressive legal analysts call it a due process-friendly course correction. If Congress wants multiple punishments for one act, it has to say so clearly. Judges can still impose long sentences under Section 924J. The ruling mainly curbs duplicative convictions. Fifth, Ukraine's finances are front and center. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva arrived in Kiev, her first visit since 2023, for talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky and economic leaders as Ukraine seeks roughly $8.1 to $8.2 billion in a 4-year IMF program to help plug a multi-year financing gap. In parallel, the European Union unveiled plans for a €90 billion loan package for 2026 and 2027, geared toward military support and budget aid conditioned on reforms. That's from Reuters, IMF statements, and Associated Press reporting. On the right, skepticism centers on accountability, burden sharing, and whether Europe, not US taxpayers, should lead. Recent opinion pieces warn Kiev will remain dependent on large infusions and argue that any plan should pair aid with a clear endgame and private sector-led rebuilding, not open-ended commitments. On the left, progressive and mainstream pro-Ukraine voices emphasize that locking in multi-year financing, paired with anti-corruption benchmarks, helps Ukraine sustain basic services and deterrence while pursuing a just peace. Reporting underscores that aid is tied to reforms, and that allies beyond the United States are being asked to help close the gap. Quick recap. The Supreme Court sets up more election rule challenges, but leaves mail ballot deadlines for another day. State moves to pause immigrant visas from 75 countries. The FBI's search of a Post reporter alarms press freedom groups. The court trims duplicate gun convictions, and Ukraine's backers coordinate big-ticket financing. We'll keep tracking where the right and left converge, or clash, as these stories develop. That's it for today's episode of Right versus Left News. Remember, understanding both sides isn't about picking a team, it's about being informed. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and join us tomorrow for another balanced look at the day's biggest stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.